take a seat if you haven't already. If you are of the praying persuasion, his name is Mark Huskisson, school name. And he is currently, like I said, director of Fusion, and he's got a couple of job offers from some very well-paid other Christian agencies. He's not sure whether to stay where he is or not. So all you need to know, just pray for him, because he's at a crossroads of what to do next. If you grab your Bibles, we are at the halfway point of looking at our sermon series on on worship. And, it's gone black. Is it? All right. Thank you. And this week, we're the 6th week. We've got an all-age service next week, and after which we've pretty much most of the time spent all our time in the Old Testament. Then in 2 weeks' time, we'll be looking at the New Testament and actually what does worship say to us in the New Testament in light of what we've learned in the Old. And this week, we are looking at whole life worship. The idea is at the end of this, if the buttons work, there we go, we'll have a deeper, more intimate understanding of worship. We'll have a whole life approach to worship, one that isn't just put on one side on a Sunday. We finish at church and then we go home and we don't think about it again. Or we maybe kind of think about it a little bit if we put a CD on it. Listen to me, showing my age, CD. Putting our tape recorders on the tube and listening to worship. But actually, everything we do is our worship, whether that be cleaning the house, whether that be doing our job, whether that be traveling to work, whether that be interviewing as part of our work, whether we're looking after kids at home. Everything we do is an act of worship. And then hopefully at the end of this, we'll actually be modeling and encouraging others in the same way of seeing their life as an act of worship. The first week, as Julia has already referred to, we looked at this idea that before creation, there was a song. There was the Word of God, there was the Spirit of God floating over the waters. The water's seen as chaos in the ancient Near East. There were things, water is seen to be feared because there's kind of monsters in it and we don't know what to do and we kind of go floating on boats, but it's quite a scary thing. Whereas actually God brings order. So at the outside of the temple, there was this huge bronze bowl that worked as a kind of, well, that was before creation, but when we go into God's presence, when we go into creation, we leave chaos behind. So when we go into worship, what chaos do we need to leave behind in worship? The second week, that's a picture of the tabernacle or the tabernacle, if you're easily influenced on how you say things. And the idea there is that when the children of God went into the desert, they went into the inhospitable place. The first thing they did when they set up camp was to set up the place where God lived, the tabernacle. That's that thing in the center, the large thing. And so that left us with the question, what desert are we in and where does our world fit around our worship? Not where does our worship fit around our world? The first and foremost, the Israelites, the priority was setting up the tabernacle because that's the worship. That's the most important thing. So where are we doing that? The next week, same picture. We looked at this idea of the verse from the New Testament, count yourselves dead to sin. This idea that as Christians, we've been saved. We don't have that sin in our lives because God has solved it. We need to, in the same way that we don't have to write the answer 2 + 2, we know the answer's 4. In the same way, count yourselves dead to sin. We need to embrace the holy reality of God in our lives and God being around us. The following week, this is a picture of, this is the point, May last year, went to Israel and went to Jerusalem, and this lady showing us around who is an Orthodox Jew, and this is below the temple. And this wall, it's not just, I didn't just take a picture of a random brick, but this wall is the closest point you will get to the Holy of Holies. So for a Jew, this is an incredible place. And she couldn't almost bring herself to touch it as she pointed it out. But when we worship, we're in the presence of God. If we aren't sent out, it's pointless. This idea that when in the temple, you leave, that when you worship, you leave the church, you take God with you. If you don't, if you see this bit here of the singing and worship and go out and forget about it, the worship here is pointless. We will always be sent out with the presence of God in our lives. So what are we going to do about it? The following week, last week in fact, so what is the presence of God doing in our lives? We reflected a little bit on a New Testament story where Jesus went up to Galilee, went in a boat. There was a bit of a storm to do. Disciples got a bit fearful. He calmed it all. He stepped off the boat, and a guy who was filled with demons kind of went, "Rrr," and that's a loose translation from the Greek. And basically Jesus kind of cast out all these demons out of this man and became in the right mind, and all the chains that were used to chain him up weren't used anymore because he was at one with God. So what is the presence of God doing in our lives? If we're going to do greater things than Jesus, we're going to do greater things than having demons manifest before us so that chains can be broken. And so we're on this week, Worship 6, Whole Life Worship. Let's turn to Exodus chapter 19. And Exodus chapter 19, page 77. I think I've preached on this twice since I've been here. I will never get fed up preaching on these verses, and make no apology whatsoever for it. It's stunning. It is an amazing vision of what we are supposed to be as Christians, whether that be individually or corporately. Exodus chapter 19, beginning to read at verse 3. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did in Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you are to obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." No. Basically, this is the call on all our lives. We are a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. Everything we do is part of that vision. Whether it's our job, whether it's our role as a parent, whether it's our role as a friend, whether it's our next door neighbor, whatever we do, everything we do has a call in our lives to be a kingdom priest and a holy person. Everything. Everything we do. That's when we're setting up the church. That is our call, to be a priest and a holy nation. When we're tidying away the coffee cups at the end of church, it's a call to be a priest and a holy person. When we go out to work tomorrow morning on a sweaty, crowded tube, you're called to be a priest and a holy person. When we're called to engage in mission together over Christmas, we do it as a group of priests and a holy community. Everything we do has that vision, has that capacity to work as God's vision. And interestingly enough, it starts, though, with a call to remember. You look in verse 4, "You yourselves have seen what I did in Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." The Exodus story starts with them being in slavery. And God calls us to remember how we were once a slave to sin. We were all slaves to sin, but we now engage with him. We're priests, we're a holy nation. Remember that. Remember that. Everything we do fulfills that vision. What is our response to that? What was the Jews' response to that, or the people of God's response to that? Well, the rest of the Old Testament tells that story. It was a kind of in, out, shake it all about. It never really was good. It never really was terrible. Whenever they thought it was right, it would fall down. And that never happens to any of us, does it? Good. And we're dealing with the reality of working through that. Our response is to be a kingdom of priests and a holy Let's turn to our next passage, Leviticus 1. If you know anything about preaching, about me preaching, I'll nearly always try and get it back to Leviticus. And it's tragic, but there you go. The idea of Exodus, it starts with them in slavery. If you just flick back one page, it finishes them with seeing the glory of the Lord covering the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord covered the tabernacle. That's the thing we referenced a few minutes ago. The travels of the Israelites, wherever the cloud lifted above them, the tabernacle they would set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out until the day it lifted. They finished being in the presence of God. So how do you do that? How do you worship when you've got the presence amongst them? You turn over the page. How do you worship? You have Leviticus. And so I'm just going to read various different bits from Leviticus chapter 1 verses. You want to read it yourself in your own time. Do that. It's 1 to 17. The Lord God called to Moses and spoke to him at the tent of meeting. He said, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when anyone among you brings an offering to the Lord, bring as your offering an animal from either the herd or the flock." Verse 3. If the offering is a burnt offering from the herd, you will offer a male without defect. Aaron's sons, the priests, further on in the verses, Aaron's sons, the priests, shall bring the blood and splash it against the sides of the altar and at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Later on, towards the end of verse 9, it is a burnt offering, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to God. So we have an offering from a herd, so we have a cow. Verse 10, we have, if it's an offering, a burnt offering from the flock, from either the sheep or the goats. Later on in verse 11, Aaron's sons, the priest, shall splash it, the blood against the sides of the altar. Later on, towards the end of verse 13, it is a burnt offering, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to God. Next verse, if the offering of the Lord is a burnt offering of birds, you are to offer a dove or a young pigeon. It is a burnt offering, a food offering, and an aroma pleasing to God. So, we have a cow, we have a lamb, and we have a pigeon. Pigeon, lamb, cow. This was the framework of worship for the people of God in Leviticus. Pigeon, lamb, cow. Now, this wasn't just a random selection of animals. Oh, I like a bit of cow. I like a bit of lamb. I like a bit of cow. And it wasn't that. There was a framework for it because it was done so everybody could partake in it. If you were quite a rich person of God, you gave a cow because you could afford it, that you were blessed by God with this amazing gift of this amazing farm where you could farm cows and you made a lot of money from it. So the call on your life is to give a cow. But your next door neighbor, he's not as rich. He can't afford to give a cow, so he gives a lamb. It has to cost. Interestingly enough, if you fast forward, if you rewind a little bit and look into the story of the Passover, the idea of a sacrifice, a lamb sacrifice there, is that actually to include the children, the expectation was that the lamb came to live with the family a month before Passover. Now, if you've got little kids or you're aware of little kids in your life, can you imagine the process? Dad, as the farmer, has to choose a lamb that without blemish, it's got to be a good one. It can't be a duff one. It can't be the one that got trampled and got a duff leg, because that's a shoddy one. You won't get that much for it. Give it to God, it'll be all right. It's got to be an expensive one. And it's got to live as part of the Passover with the kids in the house for a whole month. At the end of which, they've got, some of you cottoned on as to what's going on, then at the end of which, they've got to offer it as a sacrifice as part of Passover worship. Can you imagine the kids' response to this? It won't be overly positive, because built into the worship and the sacrifice of this, of the system of the sacrifice here, is that it's going to cost everybody, even the kids who've named it Fluffball, or Lammykins, or Sean. Some of you got that. But anyway, so the expectation is it's going to cost. It's a relative cost to whether you can afford it. Even built into this system is this idea that a sacrifice takes into account if you have nothing. Go and catch a pigeon. Not the duff shoddy ones that are at Trafalgar Square that are all a bit ratty and horrible. It's got to be a good one. You've got to put the effort in. You've got to put the work in. But built into the system is a capacity that everybody can worship. And that everybody's offering is equal. Look at the response each time. It's a burnt offering, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to God. It's a burnt offering, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to God. It doesn't say, when it comes to the pigeon bit, it's a burnt offering, but it's not as good as the others. But it was all right to God. It was treated the same. But the expectation on the giver is that it's relative to what you can afford. Pigeon, lamb, cow. This week we are looking at, all of us are looking at the challenge of what we are giving. We're looking at our giving as we give to the work of the church here at Oak Tree in Acton. There's envelopes at the back. They are named. If you're not on Church Suite or the Electoral Roll, we have blank ones. All of the bits of the information all have PLC on the bottom. Not that I don't know whether it's a limited company or whatever that means, but it's not because of that. It's there to remind us that giving is relative to what we can afford, not the expectation of, look, everybody's got to give a cow. Because everybody gives in a different way. All of us can access this in a different way. All of us has a challenge that works in a different way. If you're on a whacking great income, the challenge is the same as if you've not got any income. But how does that work? How does the catching of a pigeon work for somebody who has very little, if any, income? The reality is, in those envelopes is a sheet of how you can offer time to work at CAP, how you can offer time as a volunteer at a food bank, how you can help in different aspects of the church. That is a burnt offering. That is an offering to God that is pleasing to him. It is accessed the same. The challenge is the same. At Oak Tree, we have a vision. We're blessed to be a blessing. We've worked over the 25 years last September. But throughout all we do, it does cost money to run Oak Tree. Myself and Julia, we're paid by the diocese. No, we're not paid technically. We have a, what's the word? Stipend. Like, you know more than me. We have a stipend that frees us up to lead churches. But over and above that, we have stuff that goes on week to week. We have people who turn up at the door who need food, who need travel, who need support, who need prayer. To keep this building open is an amazing, amazing thing that we're on the high street, but it does cost money. We have people like the slightly scary Becky, turn around and look at the scary lady waving. I have permission to call her scary. Okay, I had to ask permission to call her that. And she is our church administrator, and she is wonderful. Let's give her a big round of applause. Last week, I just got back, and I sat down with her. I said, how's it going? And she said, well, it's fine until you came back. Yes, and so all of these things do cost money, whether we give money away, whether we work with CAP, or whether we work with Food Bank. Oak Tree has a great big vision. We have heard about Sean, or Lion, who's coming in a month or so's time to come and work with us. He's going to be housed. If you're in a position where you've not got much disposable income or a spare room in your house, you might think, we could house him. Maybe that is something that is your pigeon, your lamb, your cow for you and your household. He's going to be working with us. He's going to do a bit of training. We're going to support him. He's going to be paid as an intern, but he needs to be welcomed. Maybe you part of your pigeon, lamb, cow is actually just meeting with him and feeding him and being a blessing to him in that way. We have CAP, we have the office going on, we pray for people. One of the new things that, I think Julia came up with this idea that we started, is that we're trying to do weekly an email to groups of people on the electoral roll and ask them what they want praying about. So every staff meeting we come to, if you're on the electoral roll, we will be praying for you that week, specifically if you email us back anything you want prayer for. Even if you don't reply, we will still pray for you in name. That is part of our ministry of Oak Tree. That is what we do. That is why the office is open, and that is why people give to the vision of Oak Tree. Next year, we can't go into masses of details, but we are on the brink of quite an exciting project working with another church. This is something that is going to cost us both physically and monetarily. Is that a word? Yes, it is. And it's going to cost us physically, spiritually, emotionally, because it's an exciting project, but it's a scary one. Like I said, we can't go into much details at the moment, but this is our vision for going out into the community, working with other churches. There's posters on the wall for the Discover Me thing in the new year. The idea is that on a Saturday in the new year, we're going to open the doors, and all our hubs for the next term are going to be advertised to the community. I had a meeting this morning with Ruth Roth about planning what we're going to do at our Christmas Carol concert, which this year is going to be at St. Mary's. We're using their venue because it's a wonderful Christmas venue. But we need the finance, the vision, the prayer and the support and the invites from you to get people in through this door so we can share the gospel with them. Remember, one is not too few. We're not expecting you to go out and invite hundreds, but what is the one that you're going to come along with on the 15th of December? Yes, 15th of December. So what are we going to do? The challenge is to pray and to discuss. The envelopes at the back, please don't go without one. Whether your name is on it or whether your name is not on it, you want to sign up to do it. We've got sign-up sheets for Church Suite, and to get more information to you over the next week, we will be sending it out again via Church Suite as a reminder with all the information on. I'll do it, if I can summarize this talk, we will do a summary of that talk to add it into the envelopes and to send out the ones that aren't collected. We'll be sending a link to the video of the talk so we can push the challenge to us all. Whether you live on your own or whether you live with someone else. If you want to discuss it with us, we're happy to do that. If you want to discuss it with your family, do that. But pray as a priority. Fill the forms in. If you're in a position now where you think, actually, I know what I'm going to do with my pigeon, lamb, cow this year. There are pens at the back. Fill them in and put them in the grey envelope box at the back on the right of the door. If not, take them home. Fill them in. When you get home, we'll have more blank ones because it's guaranteed there'll be at least one of us who comes back going, oh, I forgot to bring it. Don't worry, we will have blank forms next week. We're trying to get the challenge out there, so on the 27th, all the return stuff goes into the grey box, so that me and Sam can have the finest night of the year, where me and Sam can sit down and work out the budget. Sam's shaking his head with the knowledge he's got to do colours and make it really simple for me to understand, but he's wonderfully gifted in this. He's a Tim whisperer, and that's now an official term. But we can set the budgets for next year. We are slightly we've got this exciting project on the horizon idea, but the challenge is there. It's exciting, it's going to cost money, it's going to cost time, it's going to cost masses of prayer. But it's there. The challenge is amongst us. How do we respond to the challenge of the pigeon, lamb, cow? There is a challenge for all of us. Wherever we sit, however we earn, however we engage with God, it's accessible to all of us. So how are we going to respond? I'm going to get the band to come on up.